Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. The audio is okay. Thomas is saying, okay. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay.
Yes,
so
loud and clear.
Let's go ahead. First of all, thank you to our Portuguese colleagues, to our friend, my dear friend, Rui Santos, for organizing and hosting this meeting and give us the opportunity to discuss about these important points regarding medical devices availability in the middle of this conference, aimed to deal with availability of medicines and medical devices as well as innovation. This second panel is dedicated to medical devices, and we count on with 3 authorized speakers. Let me introduce them, and then we can go on with presentations. First of all, we have with us Ana Eva Ampelas. She's head of the Unit V6 in the European Commission, the DG Santé, the Unit of Medical Devices and Health Technology Assessments. After her, we can enjoy the presentation by Thomas Weiss-Müller, Head of Medical Devices in the Danish Agency. Thank you, Thomas. And currently the chair of the CAMD. And finally, we could enjoy the presentation of Niall McCallennan. He's the Director of Medical Devices in the HPRA, the Irish agency, and I think that the whole three, the all three will give us a very fruitful session, and we are going to have fun. So I won't take you more time. Thank you for joining the meeting, the audience at the other side of the screen. So let's go on. Ana Eva, when you want, you can start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for inviting me to this important panel. Will the slides be uploaded? Yeah. I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure that I have a code to change the slides. Okay, somebody is helping me to change the slides, I think. So very good. I will try it like that. So thanks a lot again for inviting me to this important discussion. I will talk on the topic of the new medical devices regulation. Are we ready? And maybe we can turn to the very first slide, please. Yeah, thank you. This is, I will try to respond to this question, of course, but I first wanted to refer to the situation that we are in with COVID-19 and say a few words about the challenges and also actually the opportunities that COVID-19 has brought in for the medical devices sector. And then I will also say a few words about where we are in terms of the implementation, also considering those aspects. So if we turn the slide, please. Looking at COVID-19 situation, that has been, of course, extremely challenging for the sector as such, and it has highly impacted the medical devices sector and also the implementation of the medical devices regulations. Very much it has focused our daily work from the implementation of the legislation to very much monitoring the shortages situation and the potential shortages situation. And I can see in my day-to-day work that has been very, very different during the crisis. From a Commission point of view, what we have done in order to monitor the supply and the demand of medical devices, we set up quite early on a so-called Commission clearing house, which has been active in monitoring potential shortage situation, and also trying to match the supply and demand. We put in place also a joint procurement agreement to facilitate joint procurement of important medical products. We also produced a list of critical medical devices which would be subject to the monitoring. We managed to get some European standards freely available also to facilitate the manufacturing of different COVID-19 related devices. We have been working hard to combat different national export restrictions, and we have also tried to put in place a coordination mechanism for national derogations in this situation. We can change to the next slide, please. In addition to this, we have also put in place a number of regulatory measures directly triggered by the COVID-19 situation. The most important of this is, of course, the postponement of the date of application of the medical devices regulation, which was supposed to enter into application a year ago, but now we are very closely to the new date of application on the 26th of May this year. The purpose of this proposal was very much to make sure that everybody involved in the implementation could focus fully on combating or addressing the COVID-19 related issues and alleviate a little bit the burden in terms of the implementation of the legislation. Next slide, please. In addition to this, we have, together with the member states, in particular in the Medical Devices Coordination Group, elaborated a huge number of guidance documents also to facilitate for the sector in terms of addressing the COVID-19 situation, clarifying the rules when it comes to conformity assessment, trying to make it a bit easier to work with the notified bodies audit, which have been extremely complicated due to the travel restrictions and quarantine orders, etc., etc. So a very broad number of guidance documents. Then we can turn again the slide, please. Having said that, I think that it's important also to point out, as I hinted in the beginning, that the COVID-19 situation has also for the field really introduced a lot of opportunities. I think it is the first time that we can really see that medical devices is very, very high up on the agenda at a very high political level. And it has also strengthened the EU health agenda in general. And we could hear from the State of the Union address by President von der Leyen that health was very high up on the agenda, and we mentioned crisis preparedness, crisis management, and very much related to the monitoring as well of shortages and of critical devices and also medicines. And that brings me to the next slide, where one of the important outputs of all this has been a new proposal for a reinforced role for the European Medicines Agency. And I think this is very important to mention also for the medical devices side, because the idea here is it's a very much related, it's a crisis proposal, it's a crisis mechanism. And the idea is very much to strengthen the union level crisis management in order to address future crises, which could have an impact on medicines and on medical devices. So we are trying to set up here a monitoring tool for potential shortages of both medicines and medical devices. Would be quite similar tools from both sectors, but still separate. And then what is more relevant as well on the medical devices side is also that we are suggesting to provide a permanent secretariat for the medical device experts panels within the European Medicines Agency. As you might know, they are now handled by the JRC in the Commission. Yes, please, we can go on. Then looking at, coming back to the question, are we ready for the date of application of the medical devices regulation? Well, we have a timeline on the screen. We are now very, very close to the date of application on the 26th May of 2021. This is a really, really important date. At the same time, we should also not forget that we will have many devices on the market that will benefit from transitional periods during a relatively long period still during the current, under the current directives until 2024 at the latest. And then I think also that we should have somehow realistic expectations. We have achieved a lot. We have a lot of challenges left, but we will also continue in the years to come to fully develop the system and to look at all the potential that we have with the new medical devices regulation. So going further, looking at the main achievements so far, and we can change the slide, please. As I mentioned, a lot has happened since the adoption of this important legislation. We now have 24 notified bodies designated under the 2 new regulations, so 20 notified bodies under the MDR. We have set up the Medical Devices Coordination Group with 13 technical working groups operating to produce all kinds of guidance documents, which are very helpful for all the actors involved in the implementation. We have elaborated so far more than 70 guidance documents together in the MDCG. We have very recently opened the expert panels under the medical devices regulation from the 1st of April. They are available to receive dossiers from the notified bodies and get involved in the assessment of higher risk medical devices. We are progressing with the UDAMED development, and the first module was released on the 1st of December last year, which is also a key achievement. And we have established the UDI system, and the nomenclature has been chosen, and so on. So a lot of achievements, and we have one more slide with achievements. If we can switch to the next slide. We have adopted a mandate for the revisions of the standards as well. Now we are waiting for feedback from Senelec if they will approve it. We have the communication campaign. We have common specifications on reprocessing of single-use devices. And we have a rolling plan where we are all the time updating the progress. But now there are still a number of challenges that remain, and we have that on the very last slide. First of all, the COVID-19 situation is not over. We are still very much struggling with that, which makes it difficult in many aspects. Joint assessments and the notified body audits and all that is getting very complicated because of the COVID-19 situation. We have the issue of the availability of notified bodies. I mentioned we have 20 notified bodies under MDR. The situation is much more critical for the IVDR, the IVD regulation, where we only have 4 notified bodies, which is really not enough at this point in time, and we would have expected to have much more. The establishment of UDAMED, we know by now that it will not be fully functional.
Sorry, something is happening. Ana Eva? Ana Eva, your broadcast is frozen. Hello? Ana Eva, can you hear me? I think we have some problems with the broadcast.
Maria, we'll double check.
Okay, thank you, Rick.
Está a ouvir aí a minha? Não dá a falar.
Ana Eva, are you back? I hope the Secretariat is taking care of this. Rui, can you confirm me? Can you confirm? So, sorry for the inconvenience, only a few seconds.
Dear Dr. Maria Lemes,
Yes.
This is the production. We have lost the connection with Dr. Ana Eva Palace. So if you don't mind, could you please go on to the presentation, and as soon as we recover the connection, we'll get back to it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you. Anaiva's presentation is very interesting, and she has highlighted important points to discuss after. In light of the COVID-19 crisis, availability of notified bodies or the readiness for the application of the MDR is very relevant. Now we can listen to Dr. Weiss Moller. He will address also the question of availability in light of the new regulation and how the flexibility is needed to warrant the availability. Go ahead, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. Sound good? Good. That's I saw some thumbs up here, so I believe it's okay. I have some slides as well, if I can get them on. My name is Thomas. I'm head of the medical device division here in the Danish Medicine Agency. I'm also chair of the CAMD. I've been that for a year, more or less. I'm also part of the executive group before that, so I've been around this area probably 5 years or something like that. I've got a quite long, I think, headline here, but I'll see if I can manage it all through 15 minutes. But let's see. If not, then probably we'll have to leave some of it behind. I just want to thank the Portuguese presidency for facilitating this conference. I think it's a very important topic. I'm extremely happy that medical devices has been put so high on the agenda, actually. I think COVID-19 has an influence here, but I also think it's very positive to take this into account here, that medical devices it's actually a growing area, and I'll try to give an insight on that in a second now. So just to say what I'm gonna say, I have a little bit of an agenda. I think, as I said, it's quite a long headline I have here. Something about accessibility, coordination, complexity, stringency, and need for regulatory flexibility. That's like quite a lot of words, but I'll see if I can get through it all. I think given the headline of the whole conference, availability, accessibility, and affordability, I think it's important to notice that medical devices is not covering all these aspects. And I think that's probably one of the things that I want to emphasize here. But let's see if I can get through it. I'll just talk with a short introduction of what is medical devices, background behind the MDR and the MDR-IVDR, the new regulations, why are they here? Some COVID-19 experience, some limitations I see, and some things that are coming together now. And I think it's positive in many ways, but it's also can also be a challenge. And I think we all should be aware of that, and that's what I'm trying to address here. Can I get the next slide, please? Yeah, that's just myself. I'm not going to say much of that. I think I already said it. Can I get the next one, please? Well, I think you all know this, and you've probably seen it before. I mean, it's a changing landscape, also for medical devices, but also for medicines. I think convergence of technologies is actually one of the main challenges for all of us as regulators. And there is much more need for cooperation and collaboration between the different areas. And also within an agency like ours, I think I live in a medicine agency. I'm quite happy that I do that, because I think the convergence here is really extreme at the moment, and the challenges here are also very interesting. I think Niall will talk a little bit more about that in the next session. Yeah, and you know, it's interesting times for patients. Let's say that. I think the possibilities within medical devices is really growing. There's a lot of new treatments coming up. Some of these are probably a little bit more popular than they should be. But all in all, I think it's important to think about this. I think you see the the different products coming in: borderline products, combination products, wearables, 3D printing. It will continues to challenge us as regulators again. That the technology. The growth in technology here is so fast and so rapid that it's actually a challenge to follow this. Can I get the next slide? So, we also had our cases here on the medical devices side. I think there has been several scandals here as well as also has been on the medicine side. I think the mesh is one of the more famous ones. The vaginal mesh, which has challenged us quite a bit. We had the PIP scandal some years ago, which was breast implants with industrial silicone instead of real silicone. We have had the older bone lock case, which was quite harmful for many Danish patients. Also, we had the metal against metal hips. I think there's a lot of stories also to be told on medical devices, and I think with the increased use of this area, I think that will only tend to continue. Can I have the next slide? Just so again, there's a lot of demands on us these days. I think the massive growth in technology, the political attention and awareness, new regulations coming, they were actually needed for quite a while. And I mean, that challenges us as authorities, and it also needs us to adjust a little bit in the regulatory framework here. How do we approach all this? And that's a challenge for all of us. And I think it's not only for technological reasons, it's also political. And it's grown now with this whole discussion of availability and supply. I think we have seen some very interesting things here. And I think it's important to address that as well. Can I have the next slide, please? Well, why are the new regulations here then? If just to sum it up, I think it is patient safety. I think that is that's one of the starting points here. But it's also access to the market for new and innovative products. That has been the discussion here. And it's also the ambition of a harmonized market in Europe. I think that's also the driving force behind the new regulations. It continues to strengthen. I think it continues to ask more and more of us as regulators, and I think that has also been the opening statement this morning, also from Stella Kyriakis, who said that it is growing. It will increase patient safety, the new regulations, and I believe it will. There is a lot of adjustments in the market right now because we are 4 weeks away from the new regulations, and there are new products. There are a lot of products that are into the grace period, but there is also products out there that will not go into the new regime. There's an ambition behind this, and the documentation and things around what if the product safe, yes or no. I think that is the ambition behind this, and I think it's important to keep that in mind also when there's critique on the system to some extent. I think one of the other things that I think is very important in the regulation is that this is really market driven. I mean, accessibility to medical devices is controlled by supply and demand in Europe. I think there is no other regulations really. I think it's the CE mark and you're free to market all over Europe. There is no limits whatsoever. And that is quite a really liberal and open market. And I think that's something that's how the politicians have chosen it should be. I think it has challenged us, if I can get the next slides, also through the COVID-19 crisis. I just took it's from the Danish Medicine Agent's Facebook profile, just to say, and the pictures to some extent speaks a little bit for themselves, but I'm not going to translate much about it. But the whole PPE, personal protective equipment, in the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis last year was a big challenge for all of us. I think supply in Europe was the continued might work when we had steady flow, but all of a sudden the demand 20 doubled, and of course nothing could really follow. We had a lot of challenges with following up here, and I think that's where and getting the supplies into the market, that was really a challenge. I think the other thing on and then face masks, I think there's still a challenge also in Denmark. Where we have a lot of questions related to face masks with proper CE marking. Is there chemicals in these face masks? Are there any? The latest we had last week was, is there worms in face masks? Apparently there are videos on the internet trying to document that there's worms in face masks. There's no worms in face masks. It's fibers that move if you put them into a microwave. So it's just a little bit of a notice here. Again, and the latest challenge, which I think is also important, that's the testing area. I think this is really something that's also challenging all of Europe. Self-testing for COVID-19, testing as all CE mark tests, I think that is really something that's also challenging us. And I think we have had challenges, we still have challenges with the market at this time. And I think patient safety and the availability of innovative medical devices, I think that goes to some extent hand in hand. I mean, we need to strike the right balance here. And I think the political mandate for now is to strengthen patient safety. But if we want to have more availability, I think that's what about patient safety then? I think that can bring us quite some challenges looking forward, if that is the main objective. Yeah, and again, there's a limit to the regulations, as I also want to say. I think we are still very different regulatory frameworks on medical devices side compared to the pharma side. I'm not going to go into this, and this was just some characteristics, I think, from the different systems that could be interesting. I made two pictures in the bottom, two houses, so to say. There's on the right side, you see an old big house that has been there for many years. And it's a lot of people are living in this house, and they're really working well together. They know each other very well. On the other side, we have this small house. We just in 4 weeks' time, we get a little bit of a new house, but it's still quite a small house, so to say. And we still need to. A lot of us from the regulatory side would like that house to be a little bit bigger. I think we could need a new patio or a new garden and a new add-on here and there. I think that's probably important to recognize. So I think that's important for us. And again, I think there is a gap just around the houses here. I think there is a gap from the citizen side here, that they expect much more of us. I think that is also a need. I think I get the question nearly every week from journalists: why don't you approve these self-tests? Well, I don't approve self-tests. Notified bodies approve self-tests. I can derogate probably. Then we can talk about that. But again, there needs to be a health reason. But I'm not approving medical devices. That is done by the market, and that is there's a little bit of a discrepancy here in what people expect and what we are doing. And I think that's also worth noticing. And I think this is an old picture that I was stolen from one of my predecessors here. I think there's two worlds colliding. I think we're coming together on one more, and I think I think the conference today is really, really positive that these things are coming a little bit closer. I think we've already started several years ago working with these two systems coming closer and closer together. And I think there is, even though it's a little bit two different worlds, I think there's huge possibilities and a lot of good things here to if we work closer together, and some of the systems, if the systems could grow a little bit closer to each other, I think that would be really, really good. And the last slide, if I could have that, I don't know if I'm on time a little bit. I think I'm okay. Just to conclude where I'm accessibility, I would say that not one size fits all here. I think it's important to say that it's two really different regulatory systems. We've been talking medicines a lot of the day, and if you see it from the medical device side, I think with a fully free market, where market access is really driven by supply and demand, I think that is that can be a challenge trying to control it. I mean, there's a lot of needs if that needs to be done. I mean, coordination, complexity, and stringency versus the need for regulatory flexibility. I think actually in the new rules there is quite a large room for flexibility nationally. And you can see that on the self-testing side. I think if one country allows self-testing to be sold in the retail market in Europe, I can trust you. It takes 2 weeks before it hits the journalist in my country, and I have 3 weeks. Then the political question is there: why can't you just approve those self-tests? And I think we have seen that in the last couple of months in Europe, and I think that is quite a challenge. And the phone has been ringing while we're sitting here. That was exactly those self-tests once again. So from the ministry, that can't really understand why why they're running here. They can understand that because they want it, but there is quite a challenge with them because the regulatory side is challenged. And again, I think we need, even though there's national flexibility, I think we need to do it in a harmonized way in Europe, because there is a spillover effect. If one country does one thing, it will float into the next country. There is really no other way in this. And if politicians need more accessibility and availability, and I think then there is a lack of coordination and a lack of capacity on the medical device side. I think it is. And this is the two worlds colliding. We have an approval system on one side, and we have a market surveillance system on the other side. And that's more or less my final remarks. I think looking forward, and this is, I think, where we are after the COVID-19 crisis. I was just about, Dr. Tedros said in the beginning of the crisis, he said, test, 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 and I will turn it a little bit around. I think it's important to invest this time. I think if we're going to do this time, I think we should do it in a proper way, invest sufficient amount of money in this, making this happen. I think doing it halfway will only harm us later. And I think we're going into peacetime now. It's time to invest while we're going into more after the COVID-19 crisis, when everything is a little bit more calm. I think it's time to look forward and plan ahead and invest what is needed to make also medical devices available and accessible. That was, I think, my final remark. I hope it made sense, and I'm looking forward to discussing this with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Very interesting and challenging. I'm looking forward to posing you questions after the next presentation. In fact, you have paving the path for the next presentation with the presentation of these two worlds colliding, because Niall is going to talk about technological, scientific, and regulatory convergences between medicines and medical devices. So we are wishing to listen to you, Niall. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Maria. And could I get my slide deck, please? So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to the Presidency for the invitation to speak to you here today on this conference on accessibility, availability, and affordability of medicines and medical devices. I've been asked to speak to you about the technical, scientific, and regulatory convergence between the sectors, medicines and medical devices. And like Thomas has reflected, I'm delighted to see that medical devices has such a prominent focus on this agenda. I work for the Health Products Regulatory Authority, the competent authority for medicines and medical devices in Ireland. Lorraine Nolan, my chief executive, who was originally scheduled to deliver this presentation today, sends her apologies, but unfortunately she had to reschedule. Could I get the next slide, please? I'd like to give you my perspectives today on some of the types of products and the sectors converging, the new diagnostic, therapeutic, and healthcare possibilities that this affords to patients and health systems, to look from my perspective at some of the biggest challenges as I see them, and to finish with some final remarks around considerations and potential opportunities to better address these challenges into the future. Unfortunately, if you're hoping today for me to go into a lot of scientific or technical detail, or indeed even to provide some answers, some short-term fixes for some of the practical challenges that we face, unfortunately, I'm not sure that I have those answers. And I also apologize that I'm sure it's the last presentation in a very long day, and presentations about regulation are never very interesting. So I apologize in advance for that. But I'd like to promote, I suppose, a cross-sectoral reflection on the current state of play, and look from a strategic and a developmental perspective at how we address our current and indeed our future needs. Could I move on to the next slide, please? When I think about convergence, I suppose I wanted to speak about it from three different aspects: products which are physically combined, products which are used in combination, often dependent on one another, and also to speak about convergence in regulatory systems and requirements. Physically combined products are, I guess, pretty much the traditional drug-device combinations that we all know. So a drug-device combination like an integral medicinal product, a pre-filled syringe, or a device-drug combination like a medical device incorporating a medicinal substance such as a drug-eluting coronary stent. These combinations have obviously been covered by the existing legislation for medicines and for medical devices for many years. Some aspects in their regulation has remained a bit challenging over the years. And indeed, I think the introduction of the MDR has accentuated some of those existing challenges and potentially raised some new questions. So for example, Article 117 of MDR provides that a notified body must now provide an opinion on a medical device component within an integral medicinal product like a pre-filled syringe or other delivery system if that medical device isn't CE marked. Likewise, the scientific opinions provided by competent authorities on medicinal substances incorporated into device-drug combinations, such as coronary stents, those all need now to be renewed under MDR. And I guess there are challenges around that, around capacity and availability and what sort of requirements and approaches are applied. Looking then at the second category, sorry if I can go back to the previous slide. Looking at the second category of products that are designed or are used in practice in close combination. We've seen more and more of this happening over the last number of years, that either manufacturers are designing products, medical devices and medicines together, or clinicians are starting to use them in their everyday practice in very close association. And we're seeing more and more examples of this with the growth of digital technologies, various in vitro diagnostics, companion diagnostics, and biosensors being used to determine and predict responsiveness to particular medicines, to monitor the success of ongoing medicinal therapies, sometimes in real time. Can you move on to the next slide, please? In tandem with this, we're seeing, I suppose, convergence across sectors that we regulate. I think the public and healthcare systems probably don't care whether something's regulated as a medicine or a medical device. They expect the same type of approach. They expect the same type of safety and performance for that health product. And they need to have confidence and be able to trust that health products will be safe and effective. I think the sectors that we're involved in medicines and medical devices have also received quite a lot of enhanced levels of public interest. And Thomas has alluded to some of the scandals in medical devices over the years. And I think rightly, there's an awful lot more interest in the sector, public attention, media attention, and indeed political attention, and increased levels of public expectations. Across the globe, there are a huge number of initiatives to try to harmonize and converge on regulatory practices for all types of health products. I have the privilege of being part of the European delegation of the Management Committee on the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, IMDRF, whose objective is to promote harmonization and convergence of regulation of health products, particularly medical devices. It makes absolute sense to me that while recognizing that regulatory systems are going to be different in different regions, and that healthcare systems are going to be different in different regions, that in particular for high-risk products like implanted devices, that in general terms, the safety and performance criteria should be largely the same, and the types of methodologies that we use for assessment of those products on an ongoing basis should be largely the same across the globe. So I think in developing our regulatory system in Europe, both for medicines and medical devices, we need to ensure that we're doing so with all of those developments at international level in mind. What do all these combination products and converging sectors afford us? Well, I suppose to sum it up, precision medicine. It's being able to use multiple sources and points of data to make much more informed decisions, much more specific and personalized decisions for citizens, for patients, for healthcare systems and providers. Through the various genomics, proteomics, and companion diagnostics, we're able to much more successfully select therapeutics, both for healthcare delivery, but also for research purposes. Digital health products have expanded these possibilities enormously, affording future opportunities, I think many of which haven't been realized, as to how we diagnose, how we detect, how we treat and monitor illness and disease, or the potential risks of illness and disease to people's health, so that we can enact the therapies or preventative strategies to minimize those impacts. Could I have the next slide, please? Looking at the possibilities that this affords, ultimately, this has and will continue to radically change healthcare paradigms, allowing people to have much more individualized care, much more control over their health, much more independence in terms of their health. And it will afford much more opportunity for very complex conditions to be diagnosed, to be treated, to be monitored, in not necessarily in clinical settings, so in community settings or even in someone's home. Healthcare professionals and health systems will be able to do so much more in the setting and provide care in a way that 15 or 20 years ago, when I was in clinical practice, couldn't even have been imagined. The pandemic over the last 12 months has radically changed our lives and introduced, I suppose, this concept of remote interactions. Medicine in Ireland has radically changed, with now the vast majority of clinic appointments for routine care being delivered through telemedicine, through virtual settings. And I can imagine that while, of course, that will decrease as hopefully the pandemic comes to an end, I imagine that its place in medicine is now fully enshrined. As regulators, I think we'll also place an awful lot more focus on what I've termed life cycle surveillance of health products, using much more focus on different types of data from new sources, ones that we previously didn't consider, we didn't use previously. And as we advance along this pathway with more digitization and better analytical tools, we'll undoubtedly have to rethink how we regulate products and rethink our traditional approaches. The medical devices regulatory system has always placed a huge focus on ongoing market surveillance throughout the lifetime of a product to demonstrate its ongoing safety. And I hope that in future we'll truly be able to realize this with the opportunities and possibilities that digital technologies afford. Could I go to the next slide, please? Of course, a huge amount of work has already been done in this area, providing guidance about the products which fall into these categories from many different organizations, the HMA, the EMA, the European Commission, and indeed other groups. While guidance is, of course, incredibly useful, we need to ensure that there's appropriate levels of cohesion and collaboration in development of such guidance to avoid any misunderstandings or differences in interpretation, or indeed differences in expectation as to how requirements should be applied, so that we can work together to produce clear, consistent guidance for the stakeholders that it applies to. About 10 years ago, I was asked to be a member of the Committee for Advanced Therapies at EMA, and I was involved in developing some of the original guidance around combined advanced therapy products. The key lesson that I took from that exercise was that as regulators from different sectors for health products, we talked about the same things all of the time, but frequently in quite different ways or almost in a different language. What one word meant for me meant something quite distinct and different for someone else. So this can be challenging and lead to confusion, I suppose, and more work involved in coming to common understandings. Could I go to the next slide, please? And the next. And we need to be very cognizant of all of the developments at international level. Organizations like IMDRF have been very active in many of these product areas over time, and international regulators like FDA have made significant advances over the years in how they address combination products, digital products, and all of the other different converging technologies. In terms of the challenges, there are a huge amount of innovation in all of the sectors that we regulate, the medtech sector being particularly renowned for it. Much of this innovation is development by iteration of existing technologies at huge pace, and I think that the emergence of digital products will only unfortunately accelerate that pace further. We're also challenged then in finding ways to appropriately regulate converging technologies and combination products that innovate so quickly to cope with the speed of change and the range and scope of potential products. So we need to be able to adjust and be agile around how we regulate. We need to continue to adapt and improve our systems to address new change and to ensure that we continue to apply proportionate regulation without unduly compromising on the scientific rigor, on the technical rigor, on the safety of the products. And I anticipate that life cycle and data sources will be critical to achieving this. In relation to expertise, I think it's essential that as regulators, we're also able to build and identify what are the types of expertise that we're going to need into the future to regulate medicines, medical devices, and all of the different combined and converging products that we see, and all of the digital products. Significant focus will have to be placed on building mechanisms to identify these skills and indeed building capabilities, potentially in collaboration with academic institutions or other organizations. But I think it's important to recognize, as I would say it, that regulatory authorities can't have all of the expertise in all of the key areas available. So we have to have effective ways of utilizing external expertise, key expert leaders in the different product areas and different technology areas, obviously with appropriate controls in place. Another aspect which I think is a particularly important challenge is the ability for the systems to provide clear requirements and clarity on how to bring a product through the regulatory process at each point in the regulatory process, from development to trial to regulatory approval to reimbursement to ongoing surveillance of that product throughout its lifetime. This is particularly pertinent for new technologies, combination products, converging products. And while many mechanisms exist, scientific advice mechanisms at EMA and other national competent authorities, and indeed scientific advice mechanisms will exist under the medical devices system with medical device expert panels, organizations like notified bodies can't be involved in providing advice under the medical device regulation. However, we need to make sure that all of those mechanisms can collaborate and cooperate together appropriately to ensure that developers of these products are clear on what their expectations and what the requirements are. And that brings me to the last point in this slide, which I think is one of the most important and one of the most challenging aspects. I think the two sectors for medicines and medical devices have grown up separately in some respects. While often seated under the one agency, I think they're often quite distinct. And there are many reasons for that. There are many necessary distinctions in the regulatory system to account for different aspects of the technologies, to account for the way that the products are regulated. However, I do believe that we have far more in common than we have different. And normalizing our I suppose, effective cooperation and collaboration and combined thinking, both at national and European level, I think will be critical to success. Could I have the next slide, please? The next slide, please. I've already talked about many of the points on this slide, but it seems that to me that as medicines and medical device regulators, we need to ensure that we can maximize levels of cooperation and convergence to appropriately address combination and converging technologies. We need to develop approaches that are mindful of all of the international developments, harmonization initiatives to ensure that European citizens, I suppose, can have access to technologies that are globally recognized, are globally standardized to the extent that is possible, and that Europe can fully embrace and align with global harmonization mechanisms to the greatest extent possible. We also need to leverage the existing possibilities to set requirements for specific technologies to provide clarity to innovators on regulatory process and the expectations throughout the development. And I think, as I've said, I think that the emergence of new data, the emergence of new data systems to regulate products will play a key role in this. And on finally to my last slide, please. To finish, I think we spend an awful lot of time talking about and thinking about new technologies, combination products, converging technologies, I suppose the newest, the brightest, the shiniest thing. And I think that's entirely understandable, but we also need to be very cognizant and careful while moving to regulate those technologies that we can ensure that the fundamental building blocks upon which they're based, the fundamental products upon which they're based, are appropriately sound. For instance, as we move into the medical devices regulation, that regulation is implemented effectively. And Anna, Eva, and Thomas have spoken to that and some of the challenges associated with that, to ensure that the MDR and the IVDR are effectively regulated, that the resources and capabilities exist to ensure that the device components and combination products, let alone the medicines components, are appropriately regulated. I think the new regulatory framework with the MDR and the IVDR, and indeed the EU Pharma Strategy and the European for Health Programme, the EU for Health Programme, provides us with unique opportunities now to really take a step back and appraise how we're approaching these products in Europe to ensure that the regulatory systems that support them are appropriately converging, that they, I suppose, can collaborate effectively to identify what we need now and what we likely need in the future to regulate converging and combined products in an effective way. So I'd strongly encourage that we seek to have that open and honest and effective exchange so that we can ensure that our citizens in Europe and our health systems in Europe can have access to those exciting new diagnostic and therapeutic opportunities that these very shiny and bright technologies afford. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Niall, for such an inspiring presentation. Well, now time to questions and discussion. I guess there is someone in the audience that would like to pose a question to our speakers. Otherwise, I could ask them. Can you read on the chat? Can you write on in the chat box the questions you would like to put to our speakers? In the meantime, it's difficult to consider all these reflections without COVID-19 in our mind. And I was thinking while you were speaking, availability, safety, are the two key points in the whole panel. Sometimes, as Thomas said, there is like a trade-off between safety and availability. But in light of the of COVID-19, when we have seen so sharp increases of the demand, how we could ensure the availability of medical devices when we are not in the way of production, as for example in medicines. I know that the EMA new mandate about monitoring and monitoring shortages of medical devices could be a solution, but I think that this needs something else, because this needs to be even in the capacity, increasing the capacity of productions in the EU soil. Maybe this is under the HERA responsibilities. How do you see this? How can we identify what our citizens need for a response to a crisis, how to increase the capacity, how to ensure the safety, how to make these critical medical devices available for our citizens? Volunteer for a first answer? Thomas, thank you.
Well, I think that's a very good question, because there's 500,000 products out there. So how to define what is most important in what crisis, I think, can to some extent be quite a challenge. I think a hospital bed can be important. Equipment for an emergency unit at a hospital is important. I think there are of course some tries. We tried in the beginning of the crisis last year to identify that. It ended up being quite hard, actually, but we ended up with a list, of course, for this crisis, and I think that's a challenge again. The market again is fully and free. I mean, that means supply and demand again should control are at this moment controlling it. So if you need this and this equipment, then you must pay the higher price to get it, and that's we will end up overbidding each other, and I think that's also a challenge looking at the market. If we're going to go in a political discussion into controlling accessibility and availability, there's a demand for some political decisions there. I think that's my opinion.
Any other opinion? Yeah, Hannah, Eva.
Yes, maybe just to say that I think it's a very relevant and very, very difficult question indeed. But I do think that coming back to a little bit the opportunities that I presented in my speech, I think it is an opportunity that medical devices has been put much higher on the political agenda. And this has also created a number of instruments that we could use in that respect. And I mean, we have put in place, we have joint procurements to facilitate the procurement of different critical devices, for instance. I think the EMA proposal that I referred to, it will help in a more structured and coordinated way to create a list of critical devices, which might be very different from one situation to the other, and that needs to be adapted, of course, to the crisis that we are facing. But and then we have financial tools, where we have seen a quite important, substantial increase in what was our funding for health issues in the past, in terms of the EU for Health funding. We have the HERA, the new agency coming up as well, where I think also we can see some opportunities for looking at issues such as production and capacity issues and so on. So I think that we have much more tools at our disposal, and we just need to reflect and to see how we can use them in the most optimal way. Thank you.
Okay, Niall. Thank you, Rana. Niall, please.
Thank you, Maria. I think it's a massive challenge, and I think COVID-19 has really identified how challenging it is. How should we best do it in future? Well, I think we need to rely on information, which is currently very difficult to get, because we don't really have full sets of information about what devices there are, who manufactures them, and what are their supply chains. We also need to rely heavily, I think, on scientific, technical, and I suppose public health assessments of these types of devices. To use as an example, I suppose we've seen, Thomas referenced, the COVID self-tests, or other types of COVID diagnostics that we've seen emerge over the last 12 months, where every member state has, I suppose, been looking at these tests, been validating these tests or assessing these tests to an extent independently. And now, of course, the European Commission have been very facilitating in helping, looking at lists of tests which are validated in different member states and producing a listing of that, but almost, I think, finding ways to cooperate better and collaborate better between the member states, the assessment on scientific and technical grounds of those tests would afford us huge opportunities to identify, I suppose, the most appropriate tests, and also to identify maybe some of the gaps or some of the challenges in providing tests or developing tests, so that we can, I suppose, appropriately move forward then. And of course, there has been a huge amount of work done over the last 12 months in trying to facilitate all that. But I think the stronger that we can get in collaborating, and the more information and the more science that we apply, I think, the better.
Thank you, Niall. I will come back to this point that you have mentioned before. We need information. But first, let's see. There is a question in the chat box from Antonieta Lucas. She says, how do you foresee the collaboration between the centralized system to approve medicines and the decentralized system to approve medical devices? Volunteer? Thomas?
Yeah, I think Niall just struck the point a little bit here. I think we need some data to work with. I mean, that's the first step. But again, I think there is a challenge, and I think that's what I tried to point out. There is a challenge with the construction between the two different systems, and it will, even if we have the data, I think it will still challenge us in the ways ahead. That's why I think after that. So I think it needs to be addressed, and I think that's why I also said I think we should invest now. If this is what we want politically, I think we need to take some consequences on some areas here, and take the consequences in and see what is the next step here. I think that is, if the political will is there, if this is what we want, I think it can have consequences to the way things are organized. That's what I tried to point out in my presentation.
Well, I think Anaeva would like to add something, but before giving you the floor, I would add another question so you can answer both at the same time. And my question is, as Niall said before, gathering information is needed to plan the increase of production, to identify critical points. And I think from my point of view that the only way to have a good information is to have a complete EUDAMED at work. Without a unique database, it's impossible from my point of view. I don't know if you agree with this, and how do you think we can face these problems without EUDAMED completely functioning? So first, if you would like to answer to Antonieta, and then good if you can answer to this question about EUDAMED, and maybe Niall can also add something about the need of EUDAMED to have a complete unique database which all of us can use. Thank you. Anaeva, please.
Yeah, no, thank you, and I will not repeat what colleagues have said, but I do think that in terms of the collaboration between the two systems, yes, we need information, we need data, but I think really we need a lot of communication and exchanges of information. It is, as I think Thomas said, two different worlds that are meeting, and they are pretty different in many aspects. And I think we really need to improve that communication. And then you can have different thoughts, I think, about how you would like to see the medical devices regulatory landscape in the years to come. But what we cannot avoid is to communicate and to understand and to better understand each other, because there is unavoidable issues which are closely interlinked. So the communication needs to be improved. Then I agree that once we have a fully functional UDAMED that will facilitate the work, the application of the medical devices regulation, we will have a much more transparent system. We will have much more data to look at, and so on. So it is a key pillar of the medical devices regulation, and it will really be very helpful for the sector. Then indeed, it's an extremely complex database that we are setting up. And with multiple references, legal references in the legislation, with different modules that need to communicate with each other and with member states' national systems and so on. So it's a complex work. I think that the progress is ongoing. It's regrettable that we do not have it fully functional when we start applying the legislation, and that we have to use alternative means instead to communicate and so on. It will be more burdensome. It will be more difficult. We will not have the same amount of information. We can apply the legislation without it, but we need to make sure that we can have it functional as soon as we can. And it's a high priority for the Commission.
Niall?
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, I think it's essential in order to try to solve some of these problems, to have the information that a fully functional UDAMED system would afford. I think to go back to the question about how do you increase collaboration and cooperation between a centralized medicine system and a decentralized medical devices system, the answer is with great difficulty. And maybe to borrow Thomas's catchline, unfortunately, it is a little bit of invest, you know, because we have 27 different medical device competent authorities. We have then currently under the directives 50 different notified bodies who are involved in the scientific and technical and clinical assessment, who are commercial organizations. So then trying to bring all of that into one house, into one place, into one discussion can be incredibly challenging. So from my perspective, the mechanisms that we develop between regulators in Europe and the MDCG and the subgroups of that, I guess we need to focus an awful lot more, in my view, on the operational, on the scientific, on the technical discussion, rather than necessarily on the regulatory or the legal discussion on one aspect of the regulation or another. Both are, of course, important, but I think to move to, I suppose, that place where we can really properly regulate these products, I think we really need to enhance I guess, the level of science, as I said in one of my previous responses.
Okay, I think if the presidency agrees, I think we are reaching the deadline of the end of the panel. I think that if we have to make a conclusion of this panel, this is really challenging, but I think that we can conclude that the constellation around the medical devices is very complex. But it has to be close to the medicines world. And we need expertise. Maybe we can gain that using the UNTC. We need to ensure availability and safety. We need notified bodies to ensure availability. We need a unique database because this could be the tool for monitoring shortages. I don't see another way to do that. And maybe that we need to repeat this session when we have the EMA's new mandate ongoing and with the new HERA, because I think that some things, some points would have to be readapted and accommodated. Thank you very much for your...
Maria?
Yeah?
Maria?
Yes?
Rui, can you give me a second?
For sure. You are wrong.
Marino, I was waiting for you to finish, so I didn't want to interrupt. I believe you have finished, or please do.
Yes. No, finish.
Marie, I just wanted to thank you very much, and also to thanks to you all the participants in this panel. I think it was very enlightening, and I followed it very carefully. And I think, as you mentioned, you have identified a number of very important avenues that we are taking now. But I wanted just to take the opportunity to, through you, Maria, to thank all the colleagues that have participated in the session during the day. So on behalf of Infarmed, on behalf of the Portuguese Presidency, I would like to extend our grateful thanks to all of you for being in this conference with all these challenges that we have in this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rin. Thank you, the Presidency. Have a nice day.
Have a nice day. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.